Within every form of media or storytelling, there will always be a time period where certain genres or stories are put into the spotlight. As a result, various forms of fiction emerge that all follow this particular storyline or genre. In the late 2000s, first-person shooters were everywhere on next-gen consoles. These days, comic book movies are all the rage for summer blockbusters, and in terms of anime, the genre that seems to be gaining the most popularity is the MMO fantasy RPG genre. Okay, technically it's not a genre, but at this point it might as well be, since there are so many anime these days that are based around people playing an online video game, often an MMO or some type of RPG, and suddenly being stuck in the game with no means of escape. In particular, there are two anime that stand out amongst the slew of massively multiplayer anime, or MMA if you will, those being Sword Art Online and Log Horizon. Both of these anime have gained a reputation for being the quote-unquote pioneers of the MMAs, especially in the case of Sword Art Online, and both anime are the frontrunners for anime based around living inside a video game. Now both of these animes have many similarities and differences from one another, as well as both of them having their own high and low points. But which of the two is better? Well, I'm not the only person who feels the need to compare these two, since just about everyone has argued which is better. But regardless, for this episode of Free For All, these two anime shall bring their best weapons, strongest spells, and a fuck ton of healing items as these animes go head to head in order to see which one is the guildmaster and which one needs to get good. Just like with Code Geass vs Guilty Crown, I shall be judging each of these anime on 5 different categories: story and main character, supporting characters, animation and art style, music or soundtrack, and finally structure and pacing. As always, I will be awarding the winner of each round 2 points, and second place only gets 1 point, and whoever has the most points at the end is the winner. For the record, this is just my own opinion, and at the very least both of these animes have merit to watching them, so don't think that just because one anime is better than another, the loser is automatically a bad anime. Also, even though I have already talked about Sword Art Online before in top 10 most disappointing anime, don't assume anything, since disappointing doesn't equal bad, and both of these animes have flaws to them. I'd also like to address that the reason why only these two anime are being pitted against each other, when there are many other anime like Sword Art and Log Horizon to compare, such as Danmachi, Overlord and Grimgar, where you see while each of these anime have similarities to Sword Art and Log Horizon, they focus more on the fantasy aspect of the story rather than the video game side of it. In fact, Danmachi doesn't even take place in the video game. Not to mention those anime are only 12 or 13 episodes long, whereas Sword Art and Log Horizon are 25, which makes it easier and fairer to compare the two. Also, final notice, no, I will not be taking the second seasons of each of these anime into account, so I want to focus on just the first season only. Plus, that's an episode for another day. And with all that cleared up, it's time to tackle some of the most popular anime in recent years and once again, risk pissing off either fan bases. Well, I already pissed off most of the Monster Hunter fanbase, apparently not liking the Tigrex's and otherwise death sentence, so what the heck, no angry fanbase is going to stop me from expressing my opinion, so let's do this! Dragons! Now the basic idea for both these anime are largely similar, as they both focus around living inside a video game, but each one have their own unique story elements and themes in order to make them stand out and be original. Sword Art Online's story is that a new virtual reality video game named Sword Art Online has just been launched that lets players feel as if they are really inside a video game, with one of the players, Kirito, being the main focus of the story. All seems well and good, when for some strange reason all players are gathered in one place where the game's programmer, Akihiko Kayaba, explains that players will no longer be able to log out of the game until they clear all 100 floors of Castle Ironclad. The only catch is that if you die in the game, you die in real life, because as anime taught us, people die if they are killed. Fact. From then on out, the story follows Kirito's journey to escape Ironclad and make it back to the real world while trying to stay alive, as well as meeting new players and conquering the castle together. Log Horizon also takes place in a video game called Elder Tale, which has just received its 12th expansion pack that many new players are excited to play. I get the feeling you can replace Elder Tale with World of Warcraft at this point. Anyway, as soon as the update is finished, players find themselves unable to log out of the game, and this is where our main character Shiro takes center stage, as he is one of the veteran players of Log Horizon, as well as having a reputation for being one of the best tacticians in the game. Shiro, despite the initial shock to the system, decides to team up with his friends Natsugu and Akatsuki, as they decide to explore the world of Elder Tale together in order to understand what is possible in this reality, and from then on out, they meet old and new friends as well as trying to establish their way of life in Elder Tale and build a world in which they can call their own. Both of these anime take different approaches to the idea of living inside a video game and tell their story in different ways. Sword Art Online's story is more straightforward, as the objective is to simply beat the game and make it home, but there's a real sense of dread since dying in the game results in real life death, and the game is built around being tackled by huge parties and many players, making it so that trying to solo the game won't work and will end up with you dying. Well, at least that's what the story started out as. Log Horizon is much less about the end goal of the story, but rather world building, since the series focuses on the characters trying to establish what is possible in this world and create a society they can all live in. As such, there isn't much of a quote-unquote main narrative, but rather the series is comprised of many small arcs that focus on different aspects of the grand scheme of living inside a video game. Both of these animes have interesting narrative, but in terms of which is better, I'm giving the first round to Log Horizon, and this is for 3 reasons, those being 1, the entire narrative of the series, 2, the themes and ideas explored, and 3, the main character. One of Sword Art Online's stronger aspects is the premise of the series, since the idea of being stuck in a video game where dying in the game caused you to die in real life is a really good premise, and the first arc of the series that follows this is a strong narrative that keeps you engaged despite some problems which I'll get into later, and because the stakes are so high, you want to see these characters make it out alive. But notice how I said first arc, since the Ironclad story only takes up the first half of the series, and the other half is set around, Alfheim. Yeah, anyone who's seen Sword Art Online saw this coming from a mile away. But yes, the second half of the series takes place in a different video game called Alfheim Online, which is similar to Sword Art, but has more races and things like magic and flying this time around. I won't spoil too much, but the main reason this arc is so despised is because it took away one of the key elements of the first arc, and the arc itself just feels unnecessary and pointless. I mean, yeah, there are some good moments in this arc, but overall it doesn't add much to the series, and it feels like a major downgrade. The best way I can describe this is like going from an epic and grand story along the lines of Fire Emblem and then suddenly being stuck with a run-of-the-mill Super Mario Bros. Story. Just watch this and I think you get the gist. You see what I mean? Log Horizon, while not as engaging as Sword Art's first arc, is still interesting throughout the entire series, and each arc adds to the story and serves a purpose. Plus, even though some arcs are better than others, each arc is rather small, instead of having half of the series being taken up by one really good arc and the other half by a pointless one. Because of the premise of each of these anime, both of them explore a lot of interesting and unique ideas surrounding the subject matter at hand. Sword Art Online brings up a lot of interesting ideas about living inside a video game, which help to engage the viewer and add story elements to the story at hand. Things like the idea of how NPCs can become real people, being unable to distinguish fantasy from reality, how the world of the game can make you do otherwise impossible feats, the concept of death and being able to get away with murder. That's rather dark, but regardless, Sword Art Online brings up a lot of these ideas. But that's the problem, it just brings them up. The series has all these interesting ideas it brings up and nothing more. Because of how the narrative flows, a lot of these ideas are present for 1, maybe 2 episodes at best, and aren't really given enough time to fully explore or develop. The worst part is that some of these ideas are meant to have a massive bearing on characters and the story, but because they're so underplayed, it makes it difficult to really connect or sympathize with what's going on. Log Horizon not only brings up even more ideas and themes surrounding the subject matter, but each of these ideas are explored and integrated into the main narrative that help to expand the world of Log Horizon, as well as being key parts of certain story arcs and character motivations. With that said, there's one concept that Log Horizon focuses on for a good chunk of this series that, while being necessary to the story at large and helps add to the idea of world building, can be rather boring to sit through and somewhat mundane at times: politics. This is something Log Horizon likes to spend a good chunk of time on, and while yes, it does add to the story and it's a concept the anime needed to explore, and I'm glad it did it can be pretty boring to sit through sometimes, and while not present in every episode, the middle of the series is where the anime focuses the most attention to this idea, and it can really start to drain you, especially if you end up watching a lot of episodes at one time. But even with that in mind, it still adds to the narrative at large, and is much better than most of the shit in Sword Art's second arc. And finally, the main reason Log Horizon's story is better than Sword Art's is because much like with Lelouch and Shu from the last episode, Shiro completely shits all over Kirito as a main character. Now concerning Shiro, personally, I think he's a very strong character, and really does feel like someone who's a veteran MMO player, while at the same time having his own unique qualities to him. From the get-go, Shiro is clever, manipulative, sharp, observant, reserved, and somewhat awkward. As a tactician, Shiro is able to come up with the best strategies for just about any situation, and know how to exploit his opponent's weaknesses in both battle and politics. And there are many times in the anime where Shiro comes off as somewhat evil. In fact, many characters refer to him as a villain for a joke. However, despite this, Shiro is more often than not kind, helpful, encouraging, wise, selfless, brave, and an all-around caring and respectable figure. In fact, many players look up to him and admire his advice. Not only that, but Shiro also relies on others to help him achieve his goals, as he knows that he cannot do everything alone despite being one of the best players in the game, and rather helps to support others who in turn support him. This is what makes Shiro an interesting character, since even though I wouldn't call him a morally ambiguous character like Light or Lelouch, despite the fact that he prefers solitude and doesn't mind being seen as the bad guy by others, he's more than happy to help those who need it and be both a mentor and a friend. Kirito, much like Shu, is another one of those characters who have no personality, or a harem protagonist if you will, that seem to be able to make women fall for them despite being dull as a piece of sandpaper. And what's worse is that Kirito is perfect at everything he does. Now much like Shu, this makes it easier for the viewer to insert themselves into the shoes of the main character, much like an avatar in a video game. So for a lot of viewers, it makes it so like they feel like they are Kirito, and being able to be otherwise the best player in the game and have your own personal harem makes Kirito the ideal character people want to be. Thus Kirito is essentially a Gary Stu. Now while this idea of an avatar works in a video game, since the events that take place are influenced by the player, for an anime it's the complete opposite, since having a character like this makes them boring, uninteresting, and because in this case Kirito is otherwise perfect, he doesn't evolve or change for the better. As a result, the story suffers since it's supposed to be about how the main character's journey changes them and the struggles they have to overcome in the process. I mean, imagine if in Full Metal Alchemist, Edward was a perfect character that didn't have any flaws to him. If that was the case, the story would suffer greatly since the motivation to restore his brother and the struggles he deals with because of his actions and how he grows as a result of learning from his mistakes wouldn't be there. The only time Kirito had any real sense of character was in the first 3 episodes, where he was like Shiro, a bit of a loner and somewhat awkward and reserved, but still willing to help out others and someone they could look up to. It's too bad that after that, all semblance of character left him quicker than Sonic Boom killed the Sonic franchise. I mean, for God's sake, the Abridged series Kirito is a far better character than normal Kirito, and the point of an Abridged series is to take the piss. Ugh. What's worse is that Kirito is one of the worst harem protagonists I've ever seen, since while this type of character isn't exactly a good type of character, there have been many other harem protagonists that offer much more substance than Kirito. Like I said with Shu, towards the end of Guilty Crown, he becomes incredibly bitter and turns into an otherwise dictator, but soon learns to become more of a leader and how he should rely on others for their help instead of doing it alone, but also not rely on them completely. In the case of Kazuya from Freezing, though he doesn't have much personality, his kind nature and need to protect his sister's ideals help him to form a strong relationship with Satelliter, which in turn helps her to deal with her fears of getting close to people, and they both grow as a result of their friendship. Kirito doesn't have anything like this, so in the end, Log Horizon wins for having the overall more interesting narrative and a much stronger main character. Now both of these anime have a rather large and colourful cast of characters, and while not too complex or well developed, they all have their own unique characteristics and are at the very least enjoyable and memorable characters. Sword Art Online has a pretty decent cast of supporting characters, however they're unfortunately rather underplayed since the story focuses most of its attention on Kirito, and well I've already said my 2 cents about him, so moving on. While most of the characters in Sword Art Online get about 1 episode to themselves and aren't too complex, they all help to make the world seem more alive, and they're certainly enjoyable characters. Characters like Klein, Lisbeth, Silica, Agil, Heathcliff and Sugua are all fun characters with their own personalities and quirks to them. It's just a shame we don't see more of them, since they certainly helped add a sense of fun and personality to the series. Most of the other characters are really one note and forgettable, since they really don't do much or leave any sort of impact, and then there are some characters who are just complete pricks. The only other characters that are actually somewhat developed are first off, Asuna. Asuna is the otherwise secondary character of the series and Kirito's main love interest. Starting out, Asuna is portrayed to be silent, stern, and a super awesome badass. And throughout the beginning of the series, you can tell that she's pretty much the figure of authority in the world of sword art, as she is the most focused and determined character. However, after a while, Asuna gets significantly underplayed, and after the first half, really doesn't end up doing much, since the anime focuses more on Kirito and Asuna's quote-unquote romance, which in itself isn't a bad romance, and they do have some chemistry and heartwarming moments, but it feels rather forced overall, and the fact that their romance has often been held as one of the best romances in anime, sorry, no, just no, okay? There are so many better romances in anime, either for having better chemistry between the characters, or just the relationship between them making more sense. I mean, there's these two, 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 you get the idea. Also, in the second half, Asuna goes from someone who's a badass to someone that's completely helpless that Kirito has to rescue rather than fight with. So basically, she goes from Samus Aran to Princess Peach. Thankfully, her character was redeemed in the second series, but that's for another time. Even still, I like Asuna. I just wish she was the focus of the story rather than the loaf of bread that is Kirito. But by far, my favourite character in the entire Sword Art Online series is Yui. Good God, I absolutely love Yui. I mean, yeah, Yui is not in the anime as much as the main two characters, and she's not super duper complex, but I don't care. Yui is such a lovely and sweet character, as well as being one of the most interesting plot points in the entire story, and actually contributing a lot to the main narrative. I don't want to spoil Yui's role in the story since it's a rather big plot point, but I'll just say that if it wasn't for Yui, both Kirito and Asuna would have gotten nowhere, and I just find Yui to be such a sweet and lovely character who brings a smile to my face every time I see her, because she's just so damn cute. In fact, she's actually in the second arc a lot more than the first one, and she made watching that arc much more tolerable for me. Granted, she technically isn't the best character to come out of Sword Art Online, but she is my favourite character to come out of the series, and I just love Yui because hey, I'm a sucker for adorableness. Log Horizon has a much bigger cast of characters compared to Sword Art Online, and much like Sword Art Online, they're not too complex or developed. With that said, however, they're still very memorable and enjoyable characters, and they really do add to the narrative as they help to make the world seem more alive and thriving, and since Log Horizon is focused on world building, the characters and the narrative go hand in hand with one another. Out of all the characters in Log Horizon, there isn't a single one I can think of that I don't like, since I enjoy watching all of them, and they all have their own unique and very distinctive personalities. I mean characters like, and sorry if I mispronounce their names, Natsugu, Akatsuki, Nyanta, Toya, Minori, Isuzu, Rundlehouse, Marielle, Henrietta, Sarara, Krusty, and Lenezia are all characters I enjoy and remember since they're colourful and energetic characters that leave an impact on you and all stand out from another with their own unique traits and quirks. Out of the two, while I think both series have a good cast for supporting characters, I feel Log Horizon is the overall better cast since despite being a much bigger cast, every character is given the right amount of screen time to make them memorable and have an impact on the story. And yeah, while they're not too complex, they don't have to be. What matters most, especially in an anime like Log Horizon, is that the characters feel alive and unique, since it makes the world feel more alive thanks to the people living in it, which like I said, goes hand in hand with Log Horizon's narrative being built around world building. While Sword Art Online has good supporting characters, they're very underplayed and only really get one episode at best to flesh them out and make them memorable. As such, they don't leave nearly as much as an impact on you as the characters of Log Horizon do. And while I do love Yui to pieces and I like her more than any of the characters in Log Horizon, yes I said it, bite me, she's just one character, whereas just about every character in Log Horizon is better than the majority of the cast in Sword Art Online. No thanks to Sir Bland of Castle Haremclad. So the winner is once again Log Horizon. In terms of animation and art style, both of these anime are good looking animes, being bright, colourful, having very detailed backgrounds and very good use of particle effects in order to add to the video game feel of the world, which I find to be very effective and gives each anime a very unique look and atmosphere. In terms of which is better though, this round I'm giving to Sword Art Online. While I'm not the hugest fan of the art style since I think the characters look somewhat generic, the anime itself looks great, with lots of very beautiful scenery and impressive particle effects, not to mention bold and very powerful colours. The animation is equally as impressive, as it's fluid, clean, crisp and full of energy, and nowhere is this better shown than in the action scenes. If there's one thing Sword Art Online does better than most anime, it's the action scenes, because holy shit, these are just fantastic and are some of the best parts of the anime without a doubt. All of the fights in this anime just have such an epic feel to them, and the way the characters move and fight feels so fluid and natural, and it makes the battles feel so awesome and seamless, which can only be described as a pure and glorious spectacle for the eyes. I mean, there's the first boss fight, the fight with Heathcliff, the fight with the Gleam Eyes, oh my god, each of these fight scenes are incredible, and they are worth watching the anime just for them alone. Log Horizon, while not being as impressive as Sword Art in terms of production values, still has merit to its art style, since I think it's a lot more visually distinct than Sword Art, and there's a lot of visual humour present, which always makes me laugh. While the action scenes aren't up to the spectacle they are in Sword Art, they themselves are still a joy to watch, since unlike Sword Art, they focus more on the game's mechanics and how each character uses their own unique skills to win fights, and more often than not, most of the fights involve entire parties working together, which really does make it feel like a video game, and it's fun to see all these characters working off each other, unlike Sword Art where most of the fight scenes just Kirito, being the self-proclaimed god that he is, doing all the work rather than actually fighting together as a party and using each player's unique skills, which I only think happened once with the first boss fight. Afterwards, all the action scenes in Sword Art pretty much went like this. Okay everyone, this boss isn't going to be easy, but if we work together and support each other, we can overcome this bastard, no problem. Relax guys, I've got this. Kirito, what are you doing? You can't take this guy alone. What are you talking about? I'm the main character, stupid. Fire Emblem powers, activate!
Great Ether!
Bitchin'. Show off. So yeah, both of these anime have merit to their art style, but Sword Art Online is clearly the better of the two. It's more fast, fluid, flowing, and has some of the best action scenes in any anime, so the winner of this round is Sword Art Online. This is another case of both of these animes having their own merits, since they both have very strong soundtracks that fit the mood and atmosphere of each anime very well. In terms of which is better though, well, once again I'm giving this one to Sword Art Online. I find that Sword Art Online has a lot of very standout tracks that stick with me even after watching the entire series completely. The soundtrack is used to emphasize the weight of every situation, and it's done very well, since the fight music Swordland really makes the battle seem incredibly epic. The opening song Crossing Fields just pumps you up for the show and some awesome MMO action, and a tiny love helps to make those moments of love and happiness seem all the more special. This doesn't surprise me since the soundtrack was done by, and sorry if I mispronounced this name, Yuki Kajira, who's responsible for the soundtrack of many anime, in particular Fate Zero, which is one of the best anime soundtracks of all time. Log Horizon has a strong soundtrack and the music really does help to add to the atmosphere of the show. The only problem is that I don't remember any of the music when I wasn't watching it, and I found the soundtrack to be not very memorable. I mean, the soundtrack is good, and when you're watching the anime you'll definitely notice it, but once you stop, you'll completely forget about it. In fact, I wasn't a big fan of the opening song Database, which did grow on me slightly, but overall, while the soundtrack does work, it doesn't stick with me like Sword Art soundtrack does. With that said, however, Log Horizon's soundtrack has a lot more variety than Sword Art, and I found that while watching Sword Art, its soundtrack was really repetitive. I mean, every fight scene used the same music, and the track A Tiny Love was used way too often, and sometimes in places it wasn't needed. And granted, while I liked hearing these tracks, to hear them over and over again made them lose their impact slightly. It felt like these tracks appeared more in the anime than the Black Knight did in my Fire Emblem videos I make. And that's the third reference to Fire Emblem I've made, quoted meant for this video. Nice. So in the end, the winner of this round is once again Sword Art Online. In terms of structure and pacing, while both of these anime have different strengths and weaknesses in certain areas, pacing is one area both anime have some serious flaws in. The pacing doesn't ruin these anime, but it does knock the entire quality of each anime down a peg or two. Concerning Sword Art Online, the problem with this anime's pacing is that it's very inconsistent, since the first arc is a bit too fast, whereas the second arc moves at an otherwise snail's pace. This is mainly due to the way the narrative is structured, since in the first arc there are many time skips throughout the series, so certain events or plot points are either rushed to conclusion or feel rather forced, a good example being Kirito and Asuna's romance. The second arc doesn't have any time skips, but because of the slow pacing, it really overstays its welcome, and sitting through parts of this arc become otherwise mundane and boring. I feel that if they switched the pacing of the two arcs around, it would have been much better, so that we get time to explore Ironclad properly, or hell, they should have just scrapped the second arc and focused entirely on the first one since it was so much stronger. Log Horizon has much more consistent pacing, but the pacing itself is pretty slow. Now to be fair, for a series like Log Horizon, I appreciate this decision to take things slow in order to better establish the type of world the characters live in and explore a lot of ideas and themes surrounding the narrative. But with that said, because of the slow pacing, Log Horizon can get rather boring at times, especially in the middle of the series where the anime turns its attention to politics, and at this point, unless you're the patient type or enjoy the type of story that focuses on world building, Log Horizon might just put you to sleep in the worst case scenario. In terms of which is worse, while Log Horizon can get boring at times, there's never an episode of Log Horizon that I would skip, since they all add something to the story, or at the very least contribute to some of the themes present in the narrative. That's not something I can say for Sword Art Online, since Sword Art Online suffers from something a lot of anime suffer from: Dragon Ball Z syndrome. Before you get ahead of yourself, when I say Dragon Ball Z syndrome, I don't mean something like this. Ha ha ha, Saiyan monkey, because of that blast, this planet is going to blow up in 5 minutes. 35 episodes later. Oh no, the planet's about to blow up! Well, that's the longest 5 minutes I've ever seen. No, when I say Dragon Ball Z syndrome, I'm referring to the fact that Dragon Ball Z has some of the most amazing episodes or moments in anime ever. Moments that make your blood pump, heart stop, eyes water, scream in excitement, bask in the awe and majesty of what's going on. Moments that make the anime worth watching because they're just so damn good. But only in certain episodes, whereas other episodes are boring, dull, stupid, and serve no purpose whatsoever, and can easily be skipped because you're not missing out on much. Sword Art Online is an anime that suffers from this, since there are certain episodes in this anime that are just fantastic, and are the main reason people like this anime. I mean, the first 3 episodes are fantastic, the boss fight episodes are fantastic, the Yui episodes of the first arc are fantastic, some of the character focus episodes are fantastic, the second to last episode is fantastic. If a bit creepy, but regardless, these episodes are fantastic and totally worth watching, and the rest are pointless, boring, and can easily be skipped without a second thought. While I'd say there are more good episodes than bad ones, the ratio is about 60-40. That's a good 10 or 11 episodes you can skip, and for an anime, that's bad. This is what puts Log Horizon above Sword Art in terms of pacing, since while Log Horizon is slow, it's at the very least consistent and I wouldn't skip any of the episodes, even some of the more boring ones. I can't say the same thing for Sword Art since it's very hit or miss with its episodes, because of the fact that it suffers from Dragon Ball Z syndrome. And to be fair, Sword Art Online isn't the only anime to suffer from this. In fact, a lot of animes do. I mean, a lot of shonen anime like One Piece suffer from this, Gundam Wing suffers from this, Unlimited Blade Works suffers from this, so does Samurai Champloo, Gara Crimson Moon, Space Dandy, Haruhi Suzumiya, G Gundam, Gurren Lagann. Don't worry, I'll get to that one eventually. The point is, not all of Sword Art Online is worth watching, whereas I can watch all of Log Horizon no problem, so the winner of the final round is Log Horizon. In the end, both of these anime are some of the most popular animes in the MMA genre, and each one set out to tell their own story about living inside of a video game. Each of them have their strengths and weaknesses, but overall I enjoyed both of these animes, and I wouldn't class any of them as bad overall. Sword Art Online has the more engaging premise, as well as looking and sounding better. The anime is filled with many great moments and some of the best action scenes I've ever seen and characters I just love. But not all of the anime is this good, and everything else surrounding the anime just falls flat, having inconsistent pacing, underdeveloped themes and side characters, and a really boring and uninteresting main character. Log Horizon may not have as many standout moments as Sword Art, but the anime holds up better on the whole, and because of its much larger focus on world building, everyone and everything gets just enough time to impact on the narrative and help add to the experience. Not to mention, it really feels like these characters are living in a video game, and while the anime probably won't hold the attention of those who lack patience or are in it just for the levels of hype sword art generated, as a whole, Log Horizon succeeds at being a strong anime with memorable characters and an interesting narrative. The best way to look at these anime is that each one has what the other one doesn't, but when it comes down to the experience as a whole, Log Horizon is of an overall higher caliber, which is why the winner of this episode of 3FORALL and the overall better anime of the two is Log Horizon. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of 3FORALL. I have been Crashix500, and while I've said my piece about the first seasons of both these anime, the second season have yet to be discussed, but that's an episode for another day. In the meantime, all this talk about video games has got me craving some intense and over-the-top action. Now I don't know about you, but when I think of intense and over-the-top video games, I think of fighting games, and I think I hear Smash Bros calling my name.